Goodness.
All right, good evening. My name is Sonny Cuffey. I am the committee chair of the Prince William Environmental Justice Committee. And we are here today, this evening, to discuss the history of the environmental injustices and history of the Bull Run Mountain Preserve. Our first presentation will be coming to us, the Texas Twister. Ms. Bartonell is going to talk to us this evening about the history of the Bull Run Mountain and her parting words. And thank you so much for supporting us over the years. Bartonell?
Good evening, everyone. It is lovely and a treasure to be with all of you this evening. My name is Barnali Dubé, and for the past 2.5 years now, I have been serving in a cultural history interpretation role for the Virginia Outdoors Foundation at the Bull Run Mountains Natural Area Preserve. A lot of my mentors and leaders and bosses are here on the line. Joe Valari, Preserve Manager at the Bull Run Mountains Natural Preserve. Leslie Grayson, Deputy Director of VOF, and she has a special dedication and fervor for this project. Also Karen White, co-founder, director of the African American History Association of Fauquier County. These are 3 people who have supported this work, set it up to succeed, constantly been involved. So I have come along very recently in the iteration of this work to kind of conglomerate it, but to give you guys a little bit of background about kind of the Bull Run Mountains Natural Area Preserve's involvement in this work. I believe the Virginia Outdoors Foundation started acquiring the land that we're researching on now around 2002. It wasn't just one giant single acquisition of land. It was a parcel by parcel, some bigger parts, some smaller parts. But they found that here on the mountain that we had a very diverse people past, specifically with the Black and African American population on what we now consider the south section of the preserve. And so the preserve has 3 sections. The north section, Jackson's Hollow, and the south section, it's about 2,500 acres. And within the vein of discussing environmental justice, one of the reasons why we are able to have this research to discuss this evening is because the state of Virginia is protecting this land and giving public access to certain parts. So I think that's a very important and foundational contextual piece to think about. I came on to VOF in summer of 2022, and Leslie, Joe, Karen, people like Patrick O'Neill, other movers and community members had been conglomerating this work for the past 2 decades, actually. And we're looking for someone to kind of synthesize it, offer it to the public, again, within the veins of justice. What is knowledge if it's not shared with our communities, right? And so that was the role that I stepped into, trying to synthesize, organize, compound upon the good work that all of these people had already done and present it to the public in a way that was palatable and relatable, but yet still impactful. And so the capstone of our research project has been our hikes. What we ended up doing was taking this research that we had on the Black families and other families of other ethnic and cultural descent on the mountains and synthesizing it into this hike. We literally have people walk the path that the people who were researching walked, and we were able to facilitate communal discussions. We're able to connect with the Prince William NAACP and the African American History Association. And we had a Jack and Jill chapter out there, and we had outdoor Afro groups. So we really were able to not only turn it into a place in which the community can gather and learn, but we were also expanding our knowledge of our immediate community by collaborating with people in the area. I don't know if if Karen wants to come and kind of give an overview introduction of the AHA before I get into the history. What would you like, Sunny? You're muted, Sunny. I'm sorry.
Karen, you can come in,
Okay.
please, now.
Okay. I'm going to leave my video off. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the
Good evening.
opportunity. I've been working with different groups with Bull Run for quite a few years. And I came into awareness of the property and some of the tasks that the people down at the mountain forest trying to learn of the African American presence, the heritage of the Blacks that lived there, free and enslaved. So my basic role with the mill and the mountains itself was to research some of the African American presence. And where I started was basically learning how to research, what resources were available for documenting that. So as an organization, our organization formed in 1992, and we were afforded the space in 1997. And it was from that point on forward that we would make annual trips to interpret African American history for different programs that they would have down on the mountain. One of the first projects that I did was to research the enslaved in association with Chapman's Beverly Mill. And I actually found information regarding the people that were brought over from Maryland into Fauquier County. So from that point on, and it's just been phenomenal to learn about the various people and the connection between Fauquier, Loudoun, and the mountain and the people itself, because you have different branches that may have been in Loudoun County that ended up down on the mountain from Thoroughfare back up on the hills by the rocks and everything. So that's basically what I've been doing over the years. I did spend a little bit of time looking at the 1860, the 1900 U.S. Census at the various people at the Gainesville. I think it was the 779th district, which would be from Loudoun over into the mountain area, Carolina Road. And the people, I was able to look at the people that were living through the first phase of Jim Crow after during that time frame, and to see the different families. So you would be able to see the people living off of the land and how they utilized everything there for activities of daily lives, quarrying the rocks that were there, stonemasons. It's just fascinating. And people took the basic things that they needed in order to survive. I also researched, my first phase of research was the slave era. So I looked at all of Fauquier during that time frame. So looking at the vast landholders of the mountain, and then to find free people living there was fascinating. Then to learn different trades that they had, and then to move on and to see them in 1900, where they were still living in those general areas where they were all along. And I did meet Barnelli when she came on board. Joe brought her over, did the introductions, and it's been a wonderful time seeing her do more in-depth research of the people at the mountain, because that part is now on Prince William. So I have backgrounds with some of the people from Fauquier into Prince William, and the families go from Fauquier to Prince William, from Prince William to Fauquier, and we're all connected. And that's the fascinating part to me, to be able to see the different people and to think about the cemeteries, the burial grounds in that area, because by law, they were supposed to be separate burials for Blacks and whites. And then when people started to move out without proper documentation within deeds or wills and proper access to these burial grounds, then they become at risk of not knowing that a family member is buried there. Different members during the migration leave. They'll often come back because of the terrain. Harder to get in and out of. So you see the different things, and you see the decline in the African American population. Like in Fauquier, we're now less than 10% of a people of color, where at one point we were over 50%. So with that, you see how things that were familiar at one time, it's just like the period in which we're going through now. We're learning different modes of communication and having programs such as this Zoom, where at one point we would be sitting around a table discussing these things. So we're just going in different periods. So that's basically where I'm coming from with all of this.
Thank you. Okay, Barnell, I guess you can pick it up from here. Thank you.
I sure can.
Thank you, Karen.
I sure can.
Great.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Sonny.
No, I was going to say I was a great, information there. And ironically, I guess, I reflect on it. I really started my volunteering down there with Karen a couple of light years ago.
Definitely, this project that BOF has embarked on, specifically the Bowen Mountains Natural Area Preserve, would not be possible without Karen, the staff members at AHA, the 30 plus years of tedious, dedicated archival work that they've done. Like Karen said, I was able to sit down with her, Patrick O'Neill, Joe, and just comb through their amazing records they've collected. But to give everyone a little bit of overview of what my work has specifically encompassed, my work is a little bit more contemporary than Karen's, although I do deal with like some enslaved registers and of course the census and things like that. Our work has kind of moved a little bit more forward in history because we have very tangible current connections to the land and its previous inhabitants. Karen talked a little bit about how one of the things that is, I guess, pushing Black people out of both Prince William and Fauquier County is, right, not having access to cemeteries and lands that they previously did, not having the same access they used to even 30, 40 years ago. And to kind of start at the end and bring you guys back with us, about a month and 8 days now ago, we had a Descendants Day out at the preserve where we were able to have descendants of the Corman Robinson families, which are two Black families that have made themselves prominent in our research as we've been doing the work. And Joe and other preserve staff were having to clear. I mean, it was a convoluted experience trying to get these more senior family members back to these cemeteries and back to these homesteads, right? It was a process that took over a month. We were preparing for it. So much in the past to try and get them here, because in our research we found that the mountain didn't have electricity until the late 50s, early 60s, right? So the mountain, even though it was a place of where people were able to thrive and build community, of course, it's also not a place of easy living, right? And so people were moving off of the mountain to better, easier, less tedious prospects. And so to Karen's point about land being lost because people physically can't get back there, we can testify to that with our Descendants Day, event. But we were actually able to get them back there, see some of where their patriarchs and matriarchs are buried, and it was really an amazing experience. Definitely brought my work full circle. But I say that to say that our goal as a preserve is to get the original inhabitants of that land back to steward that place, right? The people who grew up, live, work amongst these people are the best proprietors of how to take care of a place, right? If you live there, you have the primary experience. And also, bringing a nod to our First Nations and Indigenous populations, these are the people who really know what it takes on a day-to-day basis in a natural, very sustainable sense on how to take care of this place, right? And when you push these indigents in whatever prospect and whatever ethnic or contemporary prospect off of this place, this is when we have these issues. John was talking a little bit about before the call came about data centers and development in the area and how it displaces people, how it affects the environment, how it makes it difficult for people to live and thrive in a place. One way we feel like we are trying to promote environmental justice at the preserve is getting people who live here and are from here back to this place. So who are the people that lived here on the mountain? So we have about 10 Black families that we have established on between the north and south section of our preserve, mostly concentrate on the south section of our preserve. My research, because when I first came on, I was a sophomore in college. And so this is kind of a part-time celebrity guest star work that I was doing, but we decided to focus on 3 main families: the Corums, the Robinsons, and the Coles. The Coles are the oldest of the 3 in terms of presence on the mountain, then the Robinsons, and then the Corums. Even though they all have, they all kind of interact and intertwine with one another. Hampton Cole and his family show up earliest on the census record. And so, and help me, Sonny, how much do you want me to talk about it?
Go for it.
Go for it. Okay, so Hampton Cole shows up on the 1840 census, and we posit that he was born about 1836. And so within our research, and Karen can speak even more to this with her archival background, right? When we see Black people appear, so to speak, on the census, we assume, even if it's not like their birthday and there's been some years past, we assume that they were either released from enslavement or born free, right? But Hampton Cole shows up on this 1840 census like 4 years old, so we can make the assumption and posit that he was born free, and his parents were released from enslavement and were able to create that life for him. Also, you'll hear me use a lot this evening, perhaps, maybe, posit, ponder, pontificate, because in my experience, and Karen can give her own description, it's kind of very cyclical work, right? We start on the outside of the spiral and we work our way into the center. We're using a lot of auxiliary records, building the puzzle from the corners and moving in a way. And so Hampton Cole shows up on the 1836 census. He gets married, we believe, in 1855 to his first wife, Lydia Penn. And Lydia Penn shows up on the census as being of Indian descent, right? And in other census records, we see Black people who are, we see Black people listed as being of Indian descent. And, the census is not, what it is today. You go on the computer, you click a couple of buttons, it's done, right? People have to look at you and you're answering a myriad of questions on the census, like where your mother and father were born. Did you rent your house? Do you speak English? Where are you born? How many weeks out of the year do you work? How many weeks out of the year do you go to school? Like, this was a primary document. But I bring that up to say that, like I said, Lydia Penn was listed as being of Indian descent on the census record. And we know now in our current iteration that race is a very visual construct, right? What you look like, how you're perceived is what you are. Now, nationality, ethnicity is when we start to get more specific, but we learned that when Black people were not what the census taker would consider phenotypically Black, right? Lighter skinned, looser curls, then their ethnicity could be whatever, right? For example, of Indian descent. But we learned that Lydia Penn had another uncle, Oliver, in the Manassas area, who was also listed as being of Indian descent. So that's kind of the way, like I was saying, that we build the corners of the puzzle and work our way in. So Hampton Cole marries Lydia Penn in 1855. And in 1857, we see a receipt of payment from the Confederate States of America. Hampton Cole is being paid as a laborer in Alexandria, Virginia, whilst paying little by little for 16 acres of land on the south section of the preserve. what we now have, right? Unfortunately, he has his first son, Hampton Aubrey Cole, and the Hampton Aubrey Cole, the son, and the mother, Lydia Penn, both get sick, and they're in Manassas, staying at this room. I guess we believe a doctor is seeing them above a post office. But unfortunately, while Hampton is working in Alexandria, his wife and his son both get sick, pass away within like 3 days of each other. So Hampton Cole is coming back to the mountain after laboring in Alexandria for the Confederate States of America. And he's already built a house on the 16 acres he's working to pay for, almost has it completely paid off. At this point, this is 1858 at this point, right? This is the receipt we have. This is the date we have on this letter. So we see a letter between a lieutenant and a marshal in the Confederate States of America. They're discussing business of the day, everything that's going on. And one line mentions that Hampton Cole is requesting assistance to remove a squatter from his house. Andrew J. Fenton and his wife, Sarah, are squatting at Hampton Cole's house, have an enslaved Black man there, and Hampton Cole comes back to his house, tries to get back to his house, and Andrew J. Fenton threatens to kill him if he comes back to the house that he built and paid for. And so we see evidence of this in this correspondence between this lieutenant and this marshal. And I believe they say that if the guy's not removed in 3 days, they're going to send somebody to rectify that situation. As far as we know, Hampton Cole never receives that house back, right? It's basically lost. And coming back to this theme of environmental justice, right? This was Hampton Cole is living essentially in the woods. This is the mid 1800s, right? He's working as a laborer. We assume that he could be doing some quarry work, maybe some subsistence farming. We're not quite sure, but he's taking care of the place and his community, right? Further by living in this place. And this white man comes and tells him that he can't live here, right? What does it mean? How do the ideas of ownership, right? Ownership of land, ownership of space cause something like this to happen? What are the racial tensions of that time? Why is Andrew J. Fenton able to threaten Hampton Cole's life, even though he's the owner of this place? So what are the implications of this, right? Where do we see that today in our current society, right? People asking Black people, do you really live here? Essentially asking them for, not to be dramatic, but freedom papers, right? And a receipt that you're really supposed to be here. This is really your apartment, this is really your job. Threatening them, doing things like that. And I bring up this example to say that even land ownership has not protected Black people in the past from having their lives threatened. It doesn't guarantee that they're able to keep the space. And so fortunately, Hampton Cole is able to go on and I believe go back to the Manassas area where his wife and first son were living and able to kind of rebuild himself there. But this is just a story, an unfortunate story, but also one of resilience of what Hampton Cole goes through in the state of Virginia that we still live in today. But that's one of our patriarchs on the mountain. A second patriarch that we have on the mountain, and we've centered our research around these, male homeowners, because, this is where all the tax records are coming to. They're listed as the head of household on the census. They're the ones that have the most autonomy of movement at this time for us to see kind of this paper trail of their lives. But another patriarch we have is Moses Robinson. And so he is the son, I believe the 10th son of Alfred and Susan Marshall. So Alfred Robinson, Susan Marshall, something interesting about them is that Susan was, I believe, 6 to 8 years older than her husband. And so, that was not super common at that time for wives to be older than their husbands. So that was just a really interesting thing for us as we saw in the research. But on the census record, it asks you to indicate how many children you gave birth to and how many actually survived. And so Susan Marshall gives birth to 12 children and 10 of them survive, which I believe is a pretty good ratio for me. My background is in economics, and I feel like I would be happy with that as a mother in that time period with the resources that she had. But Moses Robinson and Decatur, they are the two main male landowners in their generation of their family. We have wills from them, we have land deeds, and actually the Robinsons end up inhabiting the home where Hampton Cole originally bought and lived at. We're not really sure where the Passover changeover happened, when Andrew Fenton eventually vacated the area, but we have records of them inhabiting that area and living in that space. And something super amazing that we were able to experience on our Descendants Day excursion that we had out there. One of the matriarchs of our family, she came, and at this point, y'all, where Hampton Cole used to live is essentially rubble. The foundation is kind of clear through the grass, but she came up to this spot and she immediately remembered that there was a staircase and what was planted on this area, and she was able to place neighbors and friends for us in that same era off of this very, I guess what I can call a thin foundation at this point. But that's one of the reasons why I feel like what the Preserve does is so important, getting specifically Black people back to the land that their family worked and toiled for, to not only fill in these gaps, but also we had younger generations of Robinsons and Corms able to see like what their families went through and persevered and thrived within. And so I personally see it as a reparative piece, right? We talk about this discussion of reparations, which I'm sure we won't get too much into on this call, but just doing this healing work of getting people to land that some of their descendants were literally kicked off of, right? Barred from, had their lives starting to come back and they're able to walk on there freely. I think that was extremely impactful for me to witness, and I'm sure the family can testify to that as well. I can pause here, Sunny, and Karen can come through. Sorry, Sunny, I can't hear you.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
I was trying to pull up a file to refresh my memory. I have to apologize because I wasn't quite ready this evening. But one of the families that we had researched is one of the, not of the three. We did a little research on Spencer Hall because one of our board members is a descendant, and one of my classmates and cousins also are Hall descendants. Spencer was a free man of color. So either he was emancipated or his mother was free when she gave birth to him. That was a law that took place back in 1662. If by chance a woman gave birth to a child and she was free, then her children would be free as well. So we know that Spencer Hall registered. According to oral history from Hall descendants, Betsy advertised for his wife, or this young lady advertised for a helper, a blacksmith, and Spencer, who was single at the time, replied to the ad, and she hired him and he began to work there for her. They did acquire land, just like you mentioned, that great resource, the Southern Claim. Spencer Hall filed a Southern Claim because he lost property during the Civil War, and he remained loyal to the Union Army the entire time. So he has quite a bit of information in there regarding the war, the battle, all of those things, how they survived, what crops were taken. So you, within those particular records, you learn more about their daily lives. What crops did they raise? What animals did they have on their land? And then for me, one of the most rewarding things that I have seen and witnessed is family members, our descendants coming in, looking for family, trying to find their family history, and being able to go into the archives and to start pulling information. Lateral lines, what one family may have a photograph of one branch, another one will have another photograph of another branch of the family, and then they all come together. And I was able to witness the marker dedication down at Thoroughfare some years back. And at that point, there were quite a few Fletcher, Allen, Barry, Promise. They were all families from that thoroughfare leading up into the mountain area with all of the roots, because they were descendants of the first generation of African people of African and Indian descent at the mountain areas. What we found is that the Barbers are connected. You have the Fields, the Scotts, the Washingtons. They all intertwine. As you start to research the various census and the marriages and the births and the death, you'll find them throughout the area. I found Coles. Some of the Coles were living next door to the Burks and the Grigsbys. Those are some of my family lines. There were Fords in the Bull Run area. Fords came over from Charles County, Maryland. And then they married into the families. So it's amazing to see the strength and the fortitude of the people, and then to learn where they went to school in that area. So it was not an easy walk. I did that walk to the cemetery, and Joe and everybody else can tell you, I was out of breath, right, Ronell? But I tried it. My grandson wanted me to do it, so
right.
I did
it. This was in February. That was in February. And, everybody that I have said about, a hike of some sort, I say, if Karen White can pull this thing off on the last day of February, and it was chilly.
Yeah.
And this is when Barnell wasn't rocking the trail shoes either.
That day, came with its own extenuating circumstances. But no, I mean, Karen discussing the impact, the importance, again, bringing it back to our theme of environmental justice. I'm sure you all know better than me, Ayers property law in the state of Virginia. It's been recently augmented in the last 2 years. However, thinking about, talking about development happening in Northern Virginia, what that means for the community, what that means for the environment. It is crucial and critical for us to do this work, to do this research, not only for our organizations, but to get it directly back to the family, because these are the people that can block this development by reclaiming their land, that could be a whole separate call about the obstacles, both bureaucratic and social, that face Black families in the state of Virginia, getting back their ancestors' land, and what that means and how difficult it is. I was able to go to a conference in April in Richmond, and I was able to meet Miss Ebony Alexander. She's, I believe, the if not founder, but definitely director of the Black Family Land Trust, and she was just discussing the hurdles and the obstacles and the nefarious nature of land. How can I describe it? Hiding, in a way, right? Thinking about our situation here at the preserve, right? Buying, how parcels were bought bit by bit. There are still some awkward pieces of land that we're trying to get for access or things like that. It's not an easy process, and thinking about how knowing the genealogy of an area has ripple effects, right? Not only for the social, emotional, and spiritual aspect of a family, but the real economic consequences that come with this land being developed and lost forever. Not just the houses and the foundations that matriarchs are able to identify 60 years later, but the families who carved their lives out of the rock are now resting beneath it, right? I'm sure John could speak to issues in Thoroughfare about cemeteries being raised and built over and claimed to not be there at all. And, just a series of unfortunate events, to be honest, that put us in some of the situations we're finding right now. John, please.
Yeah, well, thank you, Barnali. I actually wanted to talk about some other things, and Karen, maybe you can talk about on Fakir's side, like Little Georgetown, and how that relates to the discussion we're having. But so I had a talk with a historian by the name of Eugene Scheel. I don't know, Karen, do you know him or who he is? He wrote a
Yes, I do. In fact, he was.
Yeah, yeah. So he wrote a book called Crossroads and Corners, and he did a historical map. And I was looking at the Black communities in the northern part of Bull Run Mountain, particularly how the digital gateway might impact. And he was very helpful to me. So Cat Harpin or parts of Cat Harpin were historically a Black community. There was a small community there called the Settlement at Cat Harpin. It was apparently common for small Black communities to call themselves the Settlement. So there was the Settlement in Cat Harpin, then the Settlement along and near Old Carolina Road, between Old Carolina Road and Carver Road. There was a small community just to the east, a farming community just to the east of Buckland Mill, and that's now covered up by Lake Manassas. And then you go along the Bull Run, you have the settlement, you have the homesteaders in the southern mountain, and then Barnali talked about the southern part of the northern mountain. You have Thoroughfare, which was connected directly by Thoroughfare Road to Old Carolina Road to Carver Road. So there was a direct connection there, and a lot of intermarriage and so on between the Carver Road settlement community and Thoroughfare. But then when you go further north, you also have a succession of Black communities. So you had Marble Hill, you had Thornton School, you have the old Calvary Baptist Church, which was where Jenny Dean was born and where Jenny Dean is buried. And Flatiron Corner, you have a whole along that Buckland corridor, especially the northern part of that corridor. That's really historical African American histories, which are going to be jeopardized by this project. And it's so some of us, particularly Frank Washington, have been blowing the whistle on this and saying, wait a minute, it's not just an environmental issue, this is an important historical issue. And one of the things that I've been told by several people that I've talked to is that at least part of the reason why the Bull Run Mountain corridor, if you will, and Pageland corridor became African American communities, or contained numerous African American communities and mixed African American, Native American. I mean, personally, I first got involved in Thoroughfare back in the mid '90s when we were fighting Disney. Disney was going to be pretty much ground zero at Thoroughfare, and that was where I particularly met Vicky Price. So I've known for 30 years, about the Black Indian community at Thoroughfare. But apparently, Black folks were permitted to settle there, and the land. I think part of it was the land was cheap, and part of it was, white folks didn't want Black folks, and more or less that segregationist pressure forced Black folks to live where they could live. So in Prince William, it's along the Bull Run, it's along Niebsco Creek, along where what's now Prince William Forest Park. So I just wanted, so I wanted to bring all of this in, and, particularly Karen, you probably have a better understanding than just about anybody in the world about how, how these communities relate, how little Georgetown relates to the mill, and, at least indirectly relates to Thoroughfare. So I wanted, oh, and then one last thing, because Barnali asked about Thoroughfare. So it's, the court case has been filed. They're expecting this week that finally the brewery is going to respond. The big delay has been the brewery refused to respond to the suit. But would they believe that that it's going to respond? There's going to be a court date set. The county, to say the least, at least regarding the Scott Cemetery, has really been dragging its feet and has been permitting the brewery to initially to rip out all of the trees by the roots, and then come in with a grader and grade it, and then regrade it, pulling out all of the field stones, which were the markers of the graves. And then they proceeded to put a picnic table and use the site of the Scott Cemetery to shoot off the fireworks on the 4th of July. One of the things that they did that's really quite despicable is last year, they brought in their own this is after they've done all of this damage I'm talking about. And it's just basically everything is graded down. The topsoil's all gone. It's down to the subsoil. And they brought in their own archaeological crew who proceeded to declare there's no cemetery there, and there never was a cemetery there. And so now, to add final insult to injury, they've built this gigantic fire pit where they have people out drinking beer and roasting hot dogs and marshmallows. So that's where we are, but it is going to court. So they are going to be held accountable. And at some point, once that court date is set, there may be some type of a rally. And as soon as we determine when that's going to happen, we'll be letting everybody know. And we're going to need all the help we can get, because it's like Barnali said, it's that, it's this historical reality that may very well, prevent further desecration. And, it's just, Karen, better than anybody, it's just, we're talking about many, many, many graveyards, because that's the way that it was. They were all family in small community graveyards. So thanks, Barnali, for calling on me.
You're so right about that, John. We once did a workshop called Family Lines and Genealogy, because you end up having to look at the land, the genealogy of the land, as to have passed down through the generations. And in doing so, you're also looking at your family lines, because once property goes up for taxes, there's a great deal of genealogical work that's required. And if the family's not up on all the branches, any proceeds that may have come from the sale, the attorneys are going to have that to pay for what their expense of documenting this. But it's sad, because we have to know what laws govern family cemeteries and what are the rights. So part of this is going to be continued education. I have been going through death records for Fauquier, looking for burials that may have taken place at the cemeteries you were just speaking of, John. A lot of what I'm finding is church cemeteries at home near so-and-so, but not specifically calling the names of the cemeteries. And that's one of the difficult things. I'm going by the death certificates. So I was hoping to be able to find a few concrete pieces, just to add another dimension to the struggle that's going on right now. We are currently trying to map as many burial grounds as we can throughout Fauquier. And Leslie has forwarded the information on the cemeteries that they are aware of on with the Outdoors Foundation. And Troy Marshall, who is our GIS specialist, he has included those on the maps that we have that's on our website. So it's an ongoing process, and it's interactive to where people, if they are aware that they have a burial ground on their property, they can upload that information to the website. So we're trying to be proactive as possible to get community engagement for these burial grounds because it's really, really necessary that we pull together to document as much as possible.
Karen, has there been any discussion about incorporating known cemeteries into the deeds, into the legal deeds for the property? Because that's been a struggle here, and the county has been really foot dragging on it. I don't really understand their argument, but they paid a whole lot of money 25 years ago to do a survey, and they came up with 500 or 600 family cemeteries.
I remember that. I remember when they did that. Now in the county in Fauquier, they are adding it into the GIS mapping program at the county. And Wendy Wheatcraft, who's the preservation planner, she is trying to document as many cemeteries as possible so that there's a footprint of them. But I have not seen where they're going that next step for the recording in deeds or anything. I don't know about that. I can't address that, but that's a good question. I'll look into that.
I can speak to that just a little bit.
Barnali, let me just say, that it was Ron Turner that did the cemetery.
That's
study.
right.
Okay, you know that. Okay, Barnali.
Yeah, because I went around with him with that for some of the. I remember the ones down at Thoroughfare. Yeah.
I was
and some on the map.
When they had the hearing and the last hearing that they had at the library, and the brewery archaeologists submitted their report and said there is no cemetery there. There never was. I was sitting next to Ron, and Ron looked at me and he said, "John," he said, I was there. I saw with my own eyes 75 to 100 clearly delineated graves marked by footstones and headstones. He says it's just ridiculous that they're trying to, wish this reality away.
We have recently been in communication with DHR, the Virginia Department of Historic Resources, and they've recently put concerted efforts and funds toward cemetery, specifically Black cemetery identification, putting that in VCRIS. And I think, I can't speak to it directly, John, but I believe they are trying to start incorporating. I was in a presentation, I believe it was mentioned, trying to incorporate some of these cemeteries into the deeds like you're saying. But I'll definitely look into that further and get back to you on that. But I think that cemeteries not being the linchpin for land protection and furthermore environmental protection in both Prince William and Fauquier County gives a new meaning to the term rest in power, right? It is these families lying in the ground literally refusing to move, and that's really giving us the fuel and the foothold that we need to protect these places. So I think there's something beautiful and amazing to be said about that. But now I think it was 2021 where Virginia signed the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act, if I'm correct. It was in their General Assembly. And so that was supposed to kind of, make things a little bit easier, eliminate, I think what they put in their legislation was like historical barriers to certain communities. However, if people don't know and they don't have the resources to identify these cemeteries, not only cemeteries, these historic churches, these historic schools, on their land, right? What is this uniform partition heirs, legislation going to do for them? But I think that for our purposes right now, that's amazing news, John, to hear that you guys are going to court. I'm very excited about that, because even for me, I'm not originally from Virginia, or specifically the Bull Run Mountains. But since I started working in June 2022, I've seen a Home Depot go up from nothing. I've seen an entire retirement community go up from nothing within I'll say a year and a half. It was wild, and then it was not practically overnight. And so the time is really now. We cannot assume the benevolence of our municipal leaders, because and not to be the economist, but in our capitalistic society, the priority will always be profit. And whether it is malicious or not, they're going to keep pushing forward if we don't do anything to stop them. And not to go too deep into our situation at the preserve, but we've been fighting developers, people coming in the dead of night, destroying preserved property, cutting up trees that can never be grown back. You understand, getting into the legislative nature of that, and getting into that space. But just thinking about how even this land protected by a state organization is still susceptible to developers and their machinations. And so what power and support do these Black families have, right, who have no knowledge of uniform partition heirs law, or what they have access to, and companies are bringing in their own archaeologists. And so that's one of the reasons why I deeply value this work, this research, how it connects me to the community, to descendants, to greater conservation efforts in the state of Virginia as a whole, because we are literally the corks in this wine bottle. If we come out, we don't know what's going to happen. But to kind of wrap up my piece, I guess, about families and about families, I talked about a little earlier how we're able to have some descendants out and go back to their land. But the main families that were there that day were Corums and Robinsons. And so Beverly Richard Corum married Mary Jane Robinson. And so that's when we see these two families come together. Beverly Corum shows up on the 1900 census. He's born in 1898, and we find that, of course, retroactively, because as I actually learned from Karen, the state of Virginia was not recording births between 1890, 1895, almost all the way to 1917, 1920 for certain communities. And so we're only able to look to death records and marriage records and draft cards to find out, what these Black families on the mountains were doing. But something really unique that we learned about the Corum and Robinson families was how this grandmother, Mary Jane Robinson, and also Kate, another grandmother, Kate Robinson, they think they called her Gilly or Gully, how she took care of generations of grandkids, right? The woman that we were interacting with on our Descendants Day was 84 years old. Right. And so she was still coming back on the mountain, interacting with everybody here. What a pillar she was to her community, and what they were able to build on the mountain. Right. I don't know. I recently went to a study abroad this past summer, and I was in Nigeria, and in the building I lived in, we had a fire scare, right? So everybody in the middle of the night, everybody had to come out of this building, and every single person in that building knew who was in the building, right? And I was a study abroad student. I was only there for a little bit, but people who I didn't even know were looking for me because everybody had just such a deep community account of who was in there, right? And I was explaining to them in Nigeria, I was just like, people can live next door to somebody for 20 years and have no idea who they live next to, not know their names, nothing, right? And they were so shocked by this concept. And I say this to say that thinking about justice and the environment and sustainability, like the the people in this neighborhood knew exactly who was in there, right?
Oh, no.
This woman that came, one of our descendants that came, she was able to name 4 of her proximate auxiliary neighbors this far in the future, right? What is the implications of that, of really knowing your neighbors, working in tandem with them, right? We have something on the north, we have a stone on the north section of our preserve where everybody apparently used to come and grind things and juice things, right? This is another ways in which communities were interacting and kind of a touch point for them and thinking about sustainability, right? Everybody didn't have a blender in their house, right? We had this one communal blender, right? This how the sense of community and this kind of how individuality was unprofitable and unrealistic, how it was able to help this community take care of one another and what we can learn from that today. But I feel like there's just so many lessons to be learned on the Bora Mountains, from Carver Road, the settlement, all these historic Black churches and cemeteries in which they were working so closely together, and how they were able to pool their resources and reduce waste and take care of one another, and children going to school together, and people, even though people on the mountain could not afford a car, they were carpooling before we ever came up with that, for for a greenhouse gas, reducing emissions and things like that. So I'm just making this point to say that this work is contemporarily impactful. There's so much to be learned from it. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think our ancestors and those who've gone before us give us a lot of good blueprints on how we can take care of one another and the environment in a way that doesn't require us to do too much more work, and it's sustainable.
Karen, do you have anything you want to say? Because we're kind of like at farewell to the Texas Twister.
Okay. Well, it has been a joy to work with you, Bud Nally. You're a ray of sunshine, and I love having younger people play active roles in preserving this history and to bring it forward, because I grew up in one time in American history. You're bringing something else to the table, which is going to be able to reach a whole another layer of younger people, which is needed. To be able to hear Frank Washington and various family members that are trying to preserve and to document their history brings joy to my heart. I've been working over the last few months with various people that are trying to come to the table to discuss our shared history. And it is extremely rewarding. I commend all of the hard work that everyone is doing at this point, because it takes a lot of hands, and we all can't fight the same battles. So we have to spread out, and different people need to take up and work on the parts that they can handle. Because, if you spread too thin, you can't get anything done. But things are moving forward, and I'm appreciative to all of the hard work that everyone is doing. I see Joe and Leslie's on here as well. Good evening, and thank you all for everything. John, I especially enjoyed you. And yes, Coffee, you were one of the first people that showed up when we were trying to document some of the cohabitation records. We were looking at the cohabitation records from Rappahannock County, because we haven't been able to find Fauquiers yet, but we have Rappahannock, Culpeper, and a few others. So it's all good.
Okay, thank you. It was great. It's always great being around both of you. Thank you so much.
Sonny, can we hear briefly from
Thank you.
Leslie and Joe?
Yeah.
And then I'll just make an announcement about the recording.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could just say one thing, one is just I want to compliment you all in this conversation. It was really lovely and for taking the time out. And thanks to Sunny and John for setting this up, and Barnali and Karen for all the hard work to put together this presentation. But also, I would invite people looking to learn more to check us out on our website or social media. So bullrunmountains.org or at Bull Run Mountains on Instagram or Facebook. And there's a lot of different resources there they're constantly evolving. And one thing that's currently up is Barnali Dubé's fellowship report, where a lot of this is written out and there's a lot of photographs for everyone to look at. And yeah, other than that, just thank you all. This has been great.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay, good night.
Leslie, you have anything you want to say?
I just wanted to thank all of you for the conversation and the work that you're doing. I'm so glad that you're recording this, because I think it's important that we can share it with people that weren't here today. And it's constantly evolving, and I'm just really happy that the more we work together, the more we find that we all have in common, and we're never done. So I'm so happy to be part of all of the work that is unfolding here and that we can share with each other.
All right, bye now. Parting words.
Okay, well, here's my parting word.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well,
Go ahead, Barnali, but I want to just let me say before you do this, I have everybody's email who's on this Zoom. And as soon as I'm done, I'm going to go to my website, my YouTube site, and then I'm going to send everybody a link. So please pass it on. I did tell Frank and the Thoroughfare folks and the settlement at Carver Road folks as well. So I'll pass it on to them.
I just to clarify, this is not like my last ever event for VOF. I'll still be around for these next couple of months. Just trying to close things out and wrap things up. But and also Joe has not let me go yet, so we'll see. But but I just want to say that it has been a joy and a privilege to work with all these people who care so deeply about this work that we're involved in. It's not artifice, it's not for show, it's not to make you guys feel better. You're deeply involved, and you guys have all been mentors and role models to me, and I've learned lessons that I will try and dissipate with my peers. But I love Black people, I love Black history, and like I always say on my hikes, this is American history. America would not be what it is without these people. And it's in our best interest to work in community and truly interact with each other and see each other for what we really are, because great things happen when we collaborate in earnest, and we're serious about living in harmony with one another. Just like the environment has found a way to work together, it's in our best interest to work together. But we have to be honest, and we have to have hard discussions, and we have to do our research. I had a professor that always used to tell us that there is no substitute for scholarship. You must read, you have to interact, you must talk, you must engage. And so that's what I've just tried to bring to this space. And you all have provided the support and the encouragement and the literal resources for me to do it. So I'm very grateful. I'm very, very grateful. It's been wonderful.
All right. Thank everyone for your time. And we'll definitely be sending it out to, we'll be posting it on the NAACP Prince William site and getting it out to the Region 3s. Region 3 is Fauquier County and most of and as well as Arlington, Alexandria, but we all share one common. I can't wait to look into this uniform petition law, because I'm sure it affects everybody's county.
Yeah. Please listen. I'm more than happy to put the Black Family Land Trust, like I was talking about, to have a lot of resources on as well. But if you just look up Ayers Law in Virginia, the uniform petition Ayers Law will come up, and you'll be able to parse through it. Please.
Okay, great. Okay, well, that marks the end of a great evening, and happy holidays and happy New Year's and happy trails always. Thank you.
Alrighty, alrighty. Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night,